The alien queen believed. She married a modest man until she saw him in action. Cities floated in the sky, connected by beams of light that shimmered like threads of energy. At the heart of this world sat the palace of the queen, Velira. She ruled the Zitharan Empire with wisdom and grace. Her people loved her, and her power stretched across countless star systems. Yet for all her glory, Velira often felt lonely. Her life was filled with ceremonies, strategy meetings, and endless politics. She was surrounded by advisors, generals, and nobles, but true companionship had always been missing. That was why she found herself curious about the human ambassador sent from Earth. Humans were rare in this part of the galaxy, and most Zitharans considered them fragile and unremarkable. But something about this man intrigued her. His name was Elias Thorn. He was not tall by Zitharan standards, nor did he possess the shining skin or elongated features common to her people. He had ordinary brown hair and simple eyes, the color of wet soil after rain. When he spoke, he did not use grand gestures or dramatic words. He listened carefully, smiled modestly, and rarely boasted. To the queen, he seemed humble. Over months of diplomatic visits and shared meals, Velira began to enjoy his company. He asked about her interests, her favorite flowers, and even her childhood stories. He laughed at her jokes, not with forced politeness but genuine amusement. The more she learned about him, the more she believed he was just a simple man from a distant planet, curious about her world, but without ambitions beyond learning and understanding. The union was celebrated quietly, without much extravagance. Unlike other royal weddings, there were no floating fireworks or parades of 1,000 ships. Instead, Velira chose a simple ceremony in the palace gardens, surrounded by crystal trees that glowed faintly in the twilight. Elias wore a traditional human suit, and she wore a dress that shimmered like the surface of Zithara's lakes. There were no grand speeches, no elaborate feasts, just the exchange of vows and the soft murmur of the wind through the glowing branches. Velira's closest advisors whispered doubts. "He is too modest," one said. "A man who hides his ambition may be hiding much more than we know." But the queen waved them away. "Perhaps he is simply different," she said. "Not all strength is loud or visible." After the ceremony, life in the palace settled into a calm rhythm. Elias spent his mornings learning the Zitharan language more fluently, often struggling with complex words but never giving up. In the afternoons, he walked in the crystal gardens, sketching alien flowers in a small notebook. Velira would sometimes join him, sitting quietly as he drew, occasionally pointing out details she had never noticed herself. The palace staff quickly grew fond of him. He greeted everyone politely, remembered names, and even took time to listen when the servants shared their worries. Unlike some visitors who demanded attention or status, Elias treated everyone as equals. Velira found this both refreshing and comforting. She began to imagine life not as a queen weighed down by duty, but as a woman who could enjoy simple moments with someone who truly cared. Yet not everyone in the court was pleased. Some nobles whispered in dark corridors. "He is too soft," one hissed. "Our queen is marrying a man who cannot command armies or manage planets." But Velira ignored them. She had seen Elias help a small child pick up a fallen flower, and the child had hugged him tightly afterward. She had seen him respectfully decline a lavish gift meant to impress, saying that the thought mattered more than the display. To her, these moments spoke of a quiet power she had never experienced before, a strength that did not shout but existed steadily, like the deep roots of a crystal tree. One evening, as the twin moons rose in the sky, Elias invited Velira to the palace observatory. The room was enormous, with glass walls revealing the swirl of galaxies beyond. He had spent weeks studying the stars, fascinated by their patterns, their colors, and the strange music of distant worlds. He pointed to a small blue planet far across the system. "That's Earth," he said simply. "It's not very big, but it's home. It's where I learned to solve problems with nothing but patience and creativity." Velira smiled, watching him trace lines between stars. "You seem so ordinary," she said softly, almost teasing. "And yet you talk about your home with such care." Elias shrugged. "Ordinary is not always a bad thing. Sometimes ordinary is enough to make a difference." Velira did not answer. She only watched him, feeling a strange mixture of admiration and curiosity. There was a depth in him, a layer she had not yet fully understood. She believed she had married a modest man, someone quiet and unassuming, and perhaps that was true, for now. Days turned into weeks, and the couple settled into a comfortable routine. Elias attended meetings with military leaders, not as a commander but as an observer. He asked questions that made generals pause and consider points they had never thought of. His insights were subtle, often buried beneath polite words and gentle suggestions, but they had an effect. Slowly, the queen began to notice that her husband's mind worked differently, not less powerfully than the Zitherans, but in ways they did not always recognize. Despite this, the outer world seemed calm. The Zitheran Empire had known no major threats for decades. Border patrols reported nothing unusual, and the Draxari, a neighboring faction, had been silent for years. Velira allowed herself to relax, thinking that perhaps the quiet life she longed for was finally within reach. One afternoon, Elias suggested a walk outside the palace walls. Velira agreed, curious to see her city from a perspective she rarely took. They walked among the floating towers and glowing streets, blending into the crowd. People waved at the queen, but Elias held her hand firmly, keeping her grounded. Children ran past them, fascinated by his human appearance, and Velira laughed as he crouched to greet them with an awkward but genuine bow. "You make them happy," she said, smiling. Elias shook his head. "They are happy because they are curious." "Humans and Zitherans are not so different in that." Velira looked at him, surprised. "You find connections where I see differences." He nodded. "Sometimes what seems small can be the most important. A smile, a word, a gesture. These can change the world more than armies or politics." The queen found herself thinking about his words long after they returned to the palace. In Elias' calm and unassuming way, he seemed to possess a quiet power that no one had noticed before. Perhaps her advisors had been wrong. Perhaps this modest man held more strength than anyone realized. As night fell over Zithera, the palace glowed like a jewel among the stars. Velira stood at her balcony, watching Elias sleep peacefully in their chambers. She thought of the world beyond, of distant threats, political rivals, and the dangers that might one day reach her empire. And yet, for the first time in decades, she felt a sense of peace. She believed she had married a simple, modest man, and perhaps she had. But even in that simplicity, there was a spark, a quiet brilliance that would soon reveal itself in ways she could never have imagined. The stars above shimmered, reflecting in the crystal lakes below. For Velira, life seemed calm, steady, and predictable. Little did she know that the true nature of her husband, the courage, the ingenuity, the unexpected strength, was waiting for the moment when it would be needed most. And when that moment came, it would change everything. The quiet days on Zithera could not last forever. Even as the twin moons rose in the violet sky, a subtle tension rippled across the empire. Reports came from the outer colonies, small mining stations and floating research outposts, of ships seen near the borders, moving quickly, disappearing before patrols could reach them. At first, the council dismissed these sightings as exaggerations or navigational errors, but Velira sensed unease in the voices of her advisors. Something was stirring in the darkness beyond Zithera. Elias had noticed it too. While most of the palace was filled with the calm routines of diplomacy and study, he spent hours reviewing the reports from the border stations. The maps he drew in his notebook were filled with lines and angles, paths the ships might take, patterns in their movement. He was careful not to alarm the queen, presenting his findings casually during morning discussions. Yet, Velira saw the sharpness in his eyes, the way he traced each route with his finger as if predicting a future she could not yet see. One morning, the queen summoned him to the council chamber. The room was vast, with high ceilings and crystal pillars that reflected light like water. Generals and diplomats sat around a floating table, waiting. Reports of unusual activity on the edge of Zithera's space had arrived overnight. "Captain Elias," Velira began, her voice calm but firm, "you have been studying these reports more closely than anyone. What do you think?" Elias looked around, careful to meet the eyes of each general. "The sightings are real," he said simply. "But I believe the ships are scouting, not attacking. They are testing the borders, looking for weaknesses. If we prepare carefully, we can predict their next moves." A murmur ran through the chamber. Zitheran generals prided themselves on experience and knowledge, and most had never seen a human read a map and data in this way. One general, tall with iridescent skin, leaned forward. "And what would you propose, human?" "You have not led armies before." Elias smiled faintly, holding the gaze. I have led humans in situations where we had no armies, only small teams. The principles are the same. Watch patterns, understand your enemy, act before they expect it. We can strengthen the border defenses without sending all forces into panic. Velira's eyes lingered on him. There was a quiet confidence in the way he spoke, one that did not demand recognition but simply stated what he saw. It was a different kind of strength, a human strength she had only begun to understand. The council debated for hours, but the queen finally approved Elia's recommendations. Small scouting teams would be reinforced, observation posts would be upgraded, and Zithara's ships would be placed strategically along possible approaches. It was a careful, calculated plan, unlike the flashy displays of power Zitharans often preferred. After the council meeting, Elias walked with Velira through the palace gardens. The crystal trees shimmered softly in the twilight. "Do you really trust me to guide your military?" he asked, almost quietly. Velira looked at him, a smile playing on her lips. "I do not fully understand all you are capable of, Elias, but I have learned to trust what I see, and I see intelligence, courage, and careful planning." He nodded. "Then we will be ready." For the next few days, the palace buzzed with activity. Scouts reported small skirmishes on the border worlds, but nothing major. Zitharan troops were mobilized in response, but Elias insisted on subtlety. He visited training grounds, offering advice on strategy, positioning, and supply routes. Zitharan soldiers, at first skeptical of a human giving them instructions, began to see the value in his approach. His methods were different, unexpected, but effective. One evening, Velira accompanied Elias on a reconnaissance mission. Using a small stealth craft, they flew beyond the visible borders of Zithara's system, observing distant asteroid belts and uninhabited planets. Elias navigated carefully, explaining his reasoning for every movement. "They are avoiding patrol routes here," he said, pointing to a cluster of ships in the distance. "They are looking for blind spots. If we place our forces here, they will be caught off guard." Velira watched him work, her admiration growing. She had married a man she thought was quiet and modest, but here in the shadows of space, he moved with calm authority. He did not raise his voice. He did not demand attention, yet every decision he made carried weight. As they returned to Zithara, the queen could not help but speak. "Elias, I believed you were a modest man content with quiet life, and yet you think like a general, act like a commander. How is this possible?" Elias shrugged. "I have learned from humans. We survive not by strength alone, but by observation, by planning, and by acting at the right time. Perhaps my modesty is only a cover for careful thought." Velira smiled, shaking her head. She realized that she had only seen one side of him, the calm, gentle side, while another layer of his abilities remained hidden, waiting for the moment when it would be needed. Days later, the first true test came. Reports confirmed that a small Draxari fleet had entered Zitharan space. The Draxari were notorious for raiding border colonies, stealing resources, and disappearing before anyone could respond. Panic swept through the colonies, and word reached the palace that one mining station had sent an urgent plea for help. Velira immediately called a council meeting. Generals debated strategies loudly, voices overlapping, each one convinced their approach was best. Elias listened quietly, then spoke. "We cannot react with chaos. We need to secure the civilians first, then intercept the raiders with a combination of stealth and direct action. If we send all our forces at once, they will scatter. But if we use the right teams in the right places, we can control the outcome." The room fell silent. It was the same calm authority he had shown before, and it had a different effect in the heat of a crisis. The generals, usually brimming with pride, looked unsure. One older general finally nodded. "Perhaps the humans' method will work. We follow your plan, Captain." Velira watched silently, pride swelling in her chest. Elias was showing the quiet, unexpected power she had sensed from the beginning. The night before the operation, Velira stood on her balcony, staring at the stars. She wondered what would happen in the morning, how her husband would act, and whether the modest man she had married would meet the true challenge of war. Elias approached, holding 2 steaming cups of tea. He handed her one. "Rest well, Velira. Tomorrow will test us, but we are prepared. Sometimes preparation is more powerful than courage alone." She took the cup, surprised by the calm reassurance in his voice. "You make it sound easy," she said. He smiled faintly. "It will not be easy, but we will face it together, and that makes all the difference." The following morning, as Zitharan scouts reported enemy movements, Elias moved with quiet determination. He coordinated with both human and Zitharan teams, blending strategies from both species. He sent small teams to evacuate civilians, used decoys to mislead the raiders, and set traps in ways that the Zitharan generals had never considered. Valira watched the operation unfold from the command center. She could see the modest man she had married now in a different light. Each decision he made, each command he issued, displayed intelligence, bravery, and ingenuity. He moved not with arrogance, but with quiet authority that inspired those around him. By the end of the day, the first skirmishes were over. Zitharan forces had successfully repelled the Draxari scouts, and civilians were safe. Casualties were minimal, and the enemy had been forced to retreat temporarily. In the council chamber, generals looked at Elias with new respect. The human they had dismissed as modest and weak had shown strategic brilliance, saving lives and protecting the empire's borders. Valira approached him quietly after the meeting. "I see now," she said softly. "You are far more than you let anyone see. Even I underestimated you." Elias smiled gently, his eyes calm. "Perhaps, but strength is not always obvious. Sometimes it hides behind patience and observation." That night, as the twin moons reflected in the crystal lakes of the palace gardens, Valira realized that her life with Elias was changing in ways she could never have imagined. The man she thought was simple and modest had a depth she had only begun to understand. A mind capable of planning, a heart willing to risk everything, and a spirit that would face challenges no one expected him to confront. And in the shadows beyond Zithara, the Draxari were already preparing their next move. The day began quietly on Zithara, with the twin moons casting soft light over the crystal forests and floating cities. Yet beneath the calm, tension simmered. Reports from the border colonies confirmed the Draxari were on the move again. Their ships, sleek and dark, had been spotted advancing toward a strategic mining station near Zithara's outer rim. Panic spread through the colony, and the Empire's defenses braced for action. In the palace, Queen Valira and Elias prepared for their first real test. The command center buzzed with activity as generals, scouts, and technicians coordinated defenses. Normally, the generals would have dominated the plans, but this time Elias took the lead, calmly analyzing reports and giving instructions with quiet authority. "Captain Elias," said one of the older generals, his skin shimmering in pale gold, "these are Draxari warriors. They are faster, stronger, and heavily armed. You cannot match them head-on with our small fleet." Elias nodded. "We will not fight head-on. We will use the environment, our knowledge of the terrain, and speed. I have studied their patterns. They are predictable when they believe they are unseen. We will use that against them." The generals exchanged glances. Humans had always been underestimated in the galaxy for their size and technology. But Elias' calm confidence forced them to reconsider. Even Valira felt a shiver of anticipation. She had married a man she thought modest, gentle, and simple. Now she saw him transform before her eyes, an unassuming man becoming a strategist capable of outthinking a dangerous enemy. The plan was set. Small fleets would move along hidden routes, taking advantage of asteroid belts and cosmic storms to avoid detection. Defense stations would evacuate civilians, while traps and ambushes were prepared to strike the Draxari when they least expected it. Elias personally oversaw the preparations, moving from station to station, giving guidance with patience and precision. As the first Draxari ships entered Zitharan space, scouts reported their positions. The enemy believed they had the element of surprise, but Elias had anticipated their paths. With a nod to Valira, he said, "They will take the northern route first. Our ambush is ready." Valira watched from the command deck, feeling both fear and pride. She had never seen war up close, and yet she trusted her husband's judgment completely. Elias' modest demeanor had hidden a mind capable of orchestrating complex strategies, predicting enemy moves, and protecting countless lives. The ambush began. Hidden Zitharan fleets emerged from asteroid clusters, surrounding the Draxari ships without warning. Energy nets fired from concealed positions, disabling the raiders' engines and trapping their vessels. The Draxari were caught off guard, their superior firepower unable to respond effectively. Elias coordinated the attack, speaking softly into his communicator. "Teams Alpha and Beta flank left. Teams Gamma and Delta cover the civilians. Do not engage unless necessary. Focus on containment. Even in the heat of battle, his calm voice reassured those under his command. The Zitharan soldiers, initially skeptical of a human leading them, followed his instructions flawlessly. Every move was precise, every decision calculated. The battle intensified. Draxari fighters broke free from the nets, attacking Zitharan ships with speed and ferocity. But Elias' preparation held. Using the unique structure of asteroid fields and hidden energy channels, the defenders neutralized the enemy without unnecessary losses. Zitharan ships moved like dancers, weaving between debris, striking where the Draxari were weakest. Valira could not tear her eyes away. She had always admired strength and courage, but this was different. Elias was not only brave, he was brilliant. His strategy combined logic, creativity, and deep understanding of human and alien psychology. He predicted the enemy's every move and turned their advantages into disadvantages. During a tense moment, a Draxari warship broke through the perimeter and aimed directly for the civilian evacuation zone. Panic erupted among the defenders, but Elias remained composed. Divert ships Theta and Lambda to intercept, he instructed. Use their speed and maneuverability. Focus on shielding the civilians, not destruction. The plan worked perfectly. The human-led teams intercepted the Draxari vessel, using minimal force to disable it and steer it away from the evacuation zone. Civilians watched in awe as their protectors moved with precision and care, saving lives without unnecessary violence. As the battle continued, Elias noticed a weakness in the Draxari formation. He directed a small group of Zitharan pilots through a narrow passage between two asteroid belts. The enemy, believing the passage impassable, was caught off guard. Trapped and outmaneuvered, several Draxari ships were forced to surrender. By the time the battle ended, the Zitharans had repelled the first wave of the Draxari scouts. Losses were minimal, and the civilians were safe. The Draxari fleet retreated, leaving behind damaged ships and unanswered questions. Zitharan soldiers cheered, and even the Council of Generals looked at Elias with newfound respect. Valira approached him as he returned to the command center. Her heart was full of pride and admiration. "Elias," she said softly, "I never imagined. You are incredible. The man I thought modest is something more, something extraordinary." Elias shook his head, his calm smile returning. "I only did what was necessary. I followed what I had learned: observe, plan, and act. You do not need to be loud or strong to make a difference." "But your actions saved lives," Valira insisted. "You risked everything, and yet you remained calm, thoughtful, and in control. You are not just a human, you are remarkable." Elias looked at her, eyes steady. "Perhaps that is what humans are capable of. We are not the strongest in body, but in thought, in courage, in adaptation. That is our strength." The queen understood then that the man she married had layers she had not yet discovered. His modesty had hidden brilliance, his calm demeanor had concealed courage, and his quiet presence had masked extraordinary power. Elias was not only a partner in life, he was a force capable of changing the course of an entire empire. News of the battle spread quickly across Zithara. Soldiers told tales of the human strategist who had outsmarted the enemy, while the civilians spoke of his calm authority and compassion. Even distant colonies began to whisper about the extraordinary abilities of the modest ambassador-turned-hero. Back in the palace, Valira and Elias walked through the gardens at night. The twin moons reflected on the crystal lakes, casting long shadows across the glowing trees. Valira spoke softly. "Do you think the Draxari will return?" Elias sipped his tea thoughtfully. "Yes. They will come again, stronger and more prepared. But so will we, and next time we will be ready." She looked at him, understanding fully for the first time that his modesty had been a quiet power all along. It was a strength that did not need recognition to be effective, a brilliance that did not demand attention but earned respect through action. For Valira, the night held a new sense of hope and security. She realized that her life with Elias was far from ordinary. Together they had faced the first challenge, and together they would face many more. The quiet man she had married was now a hero, a protector, and a mind unmatched in creativity and courage. And somewhere in the darkness of space, the Draxari fleet prepared their next attack, unaware that the humble human they had underestimated had already changed the rules of the game. Valira stood silently beside Elias, gazing at the stars. She felt a mix of awe, pride, and anticipation. The Empire had survived this first test, but the true trials were still to come. And she knew, without a doubt, that the man she thought modest was far greater than anyone had imagined. The first battle was won. But the war for Zithara's safety and the Draxari's next challenge were only beginning. The victory over the Draxari scouts brought a temporary calm to Zithara. Streets of the floating cities buzzed with activity, citizens celebrated the safety of the colonies, and the palace was filled with the quiet hum of preparation for the future. Yet, Velira knew better than to believe that peace would last. Every star in the sky reminded her that the Draxari were still out there, observing, learning, and planning their next attack. Elias had returned from the battlefield not only unscathed, but energized. His calm had never wavered, and even in moments of crisis, he moved with careful calculation. Velira watched him as he reviewed reports, spoke to generals, and oversaw the training of the Zitharan fleet. The modest man she thought she knew was revealing layer after layer of brilliance, courage, and leadership that left her in awe. One evening, she found him in the palace observatory. The glass walls displayed a panorama of Zithara's moons, nearby planets, and the distant horizon of space. Elias traced the paths of Draxari ships with a small stylus, drawing potential routes and escape patterns in his notebook. Elias, Velira said softly, approaching him, I see now what I could not understand before. You are extraordinary. He looked up, his brown eyes calm and steady. I only do what I know to be right. That is all any human can do. But it is more than right, she insisted. It is brilliance. You planned the ambush, guided the defenses, and protected countless lives. You think differently than any of my generals. You see possibilities they do not. How do you do it? Elias smiled faintly. Humans survive in a world that is unpredictable. We learn to adapt, to improvise, and to solve problems with what we have. Perhaps that is what you see as brilliance. It is simply necessity. Velira shook her head in wonder. Necessity has never looked like this before. Your mind, your courage, your calm, it is unlike anything I have known. I married a modest man, and yet I see now that I married a force beyond imagination. Elias looked down almost shyly. Modesty can hide many things: strength, courage, creativity, even love. Perhaps you are only now seeing the side I have always had. Velira felt a warmth in her chest, a mixture of pride and admiration. She had expected a simple partner, someone quiet and steady, and instead she had found someone capable of guiding an empire through crisis. The realization was overwhelming, yet inspiring. The following days were filled with preparation. The Draxari would return, and this time they would come with greater force. Elias worked alongside Zitharan generals, teaching new tactics, combining human ingenuity with alien technology, and training fleets to respond quickly and intelligently to unexpected situations. The generals initially struggled to accept his guidance. Some whispered that humans were fragile, that their lack of strength and experience in interstellar combat made them unsuitable for leadership. But as they trained under Elias' careful instruction, they began to see the truth. His strategies were not only effective, they were revolutionary. Elias introduced methods that Zitharans had never considered. He suggested using the unique terrain of asteroid belts as natural barriers, deploying small teams to gather intelligence, and designing traps that used minimal resources but maximum effect. His approach emphasized creativity, adaptability, and thinking several steps ahead of the enemy. One afternoon, Velira joined him during a training exercise. The fleet moved through a simulated Draxari attack. Ships swerved through asteroid clusters, intercepted decoys, and defended key positions with precision. The generals watched in awe as the human-led fleet executed maneuvers that seemed impossible just days before. Velira observed Elias' instructions carefully. You are teaching them not only tactics but thinking, she said. Elias glanced at her, nodding. Exactly. They need to understand the why, not just the how. They must anticipate the enemy, adapt to change, and trust themselves. That is how humans survive. That is how we win. As night fell, the Queen and Elias walked through the crystal gardens. The glowing trees reflected in the lakes, creating a magical landscape of light and shadow. Velira felt a deep respect for him, beyond admiration. She understood that his intelligence and courage were intertwined with his humility and compassion. Elias, she said, her voice soft, I see now that I married not just a man, but a mind, a heart, and a soul capable of changing the course of this empire. I underestimated you, and I am grateful that I did. It allowed me to discover the depth of your strength." Elias looked at her, his gaze steady. "Strength is not always what it seems. I have learned that quiet thought, careful planning, and patience can accomplish more than force or arrogance. Perhaps Zitherans will understand that as well." Valira smiled, understanding fully for the first time that human modesty was not weakness. It was a quiet, hidden power. In her heart, she realized that humans had a way of seeing possibilities, adapting to challenges, and acting with courage in ways Zitherans rarely expected. Over the next few days, the palace received intelligence of the Draxari's next movement. A larger fleet was gathering near a neighboring system, preparing for an attack on a major Zitharan colony. Panic threatened to rise, but Valira felt calm. She knew Elias was ready. She trusted him completely. Elias spent hours analyzing the reports, charting courses, and planning contingencies. Every possible scenario was considered, every weakness addressed. His human intuition, combined with logical analysis, produced a plan that even the most experienced Zitharan generals had not imagined. One evening, Valira joined him in the strategy room. The holographic display projected the positions of Draxari ships, Zitharan fleets, and potential civilian evacuation routes. Elias pointed to a narrow asteroid belt. "They will expect a direct approach," he explained. "We will use this belt to shield our ships. They will be forced to pass through traps we have set. Their strength becomes their weakness." Valira studied the map, amazed. "You are turning their advantages against them. You are thinking like a human, and yet it is a brilliance I have never seen." Elias smiled. "Sometimes the best defense is not to meet force with force, but to guide it where it cannot harm us. Humans have always survived by using what we have, not what we wish we had." The queen watched him work, understanding fully that the man she had married had hidden depths she had only begun to see. His modesty was a mask for incredible insight, courage, and creativity. And as the stars outside shimmered, she knew that when the Draxari returned, they would face not just an empire, but a human mind capable of outthinking and outmaneuvering them. The days passed in preparation. Soldiers trained, ships were repaired, and evacuation plans were refined. Everywhere, Elias' influence spread. Zitherans learned to think differently, to adapt, to plan carefully rather than rely solely on strength or tradition. His methods inspired respect, admiration, and trust. And all the while, Valira watched him, realizing that the quiet, modest man she thought she knew was a hero in the making, a leader whose courage, wisdom, and compassion would shape the destiny of her empire. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the crystal lakes, Valira and Elias walked together. She paused, looking at him with deep emotion. "I have lived my life among rulers, warriors, and thinkers," she said softly, "and yet I have never met anyone like you. You are remarkable, not because of what you show, but because of what you hold within." Elias looked at her with quiet humility. "Perhaps that is all any of us can do, use what we have quietly to make a difference." Valira smiled, knowing it was more than that. He had changed the way she saw humans, strength, and leadership. And soon, the Draxari would return, unaware that they would face a force unlike any they had ever encountered. A force guided by a human mind that blended courage, ingenuity, and unassuming brilliance. The queen's revelation was complete. She had married a modest man, but she had discovered a hero, a strategist, and a protector. And she understood that the coming battles would not only test the empire, but reveal the true strength of humanity in the galaxy. As the stars sparkled above, she felt a deep certainty. The empire would survive, not just because of its technology or armies, but because of the quiet power of the human she had chosen as her partner. And when the Draxari returned, they would learn that Zithara was not just defended by ships and weapons, but by a human spirit that refused to be underestimated. The calm before the storm was over. A new era was beginning, and at its heart was the man Valira had once thought modest, now revealed in all his quiet, brilliant strength. The morning sky over Zithara glowed with soft violet light, but there was no calm in the air. Scouts had reported a massive Draxari fleet approaching the outer colonies. This was no scouting party or minor raiding force. It was an organized armada, sleek and deadly, prepared to conquer or destroy. Panic rippled through the border worlds, and citizens braced for the coming storm. In the palace, Queen Velira stood beside Elias in the command center. The twin moons reflected on the crystal walls, casting long shadows across the room. Velira felt a mixture of fear and anticipation. She knew the Draxari were dangerous, but she also knew that Elias was ready. "Elias," she said, her voice steady, "this is the moment we have been preparing for. Can we truly stop them?" Elias smiled faintly, calm as ever. "We are not just prepared, Velira. We are united. That is what matters most. Together, humans and Zitherans can face any challenge." Velira's eyes lingered on him, understanding fully that the modest man she married had become the leader of a coalition capable of defending an empire. His quiet strength, intelligence, and courage had inspired not just her, but all those who served under him. The fleet assembled at strategic points along the outer rim. Elias' plan was precise. Small human-led strike teams would intercept the Draxari at key choke points, while Zitharan forces would protect civilians and cut off escape routes. Every move relied on coordination, adaptability, and timing, qualities that humans and Zitharans had never combined before. As the first Draxari ships entered Zitharan space, Elias issued calm but firm orders. Teams Alpha and Beta engage at the northern belt. Teams Gamma and Delta protect the colonies, keep civilians safe, do not act recklessly, observe, adapt, and strike where they are weakest. The battle began. Draxari fighters attacked with speed and ferocity, confident that their overwhelming numbers would crush the defenses. But Elias had anticipated every maneuver. Human-inspired tactics, combined with Zitharan technology, created a fluid, unpredictable defense. Ships moved like dancers through asteroid clusters, intercepting enemies and using the terrain to trap and disable them. Velira watched from the command deck as her husband coordinated every detail. His calm voice guided pilots, soldiers, and commanders alike. He anticipated the Draxari's moves, redirected forces instantly, and adapted to unexpected changes. Every decision was precise, calculated, and effective. The Draxari soon realized they were facing an enemy unlike any they had encountered. Their attacks were neutralized, their formations broken, and their strategy countered at every turn. Zitharan ships moved with coordination and creativity that human and alien commanders had never witnessed. Elias noticed a weak point in the Draxari flagship's formation. He signaled a small strike team to navigate a narrow asteroid channel, avoiding detection. The team moved quickly, striking the flagship's engines and disabling its weapons. Panic spread among the Draxari ranks. Their confident advance faltered as their largest ship became vulnerable. Meanwhile, Velira coordinated the evacuation of civilians from the colonies. Her voice was calm but authoritative, reflecting the lessons she had learned from Elias. The people trusted her, inspired by her composure and determination. And as she watched her husband lead the battle, she realized that his quiet genius had not only saved lives before but was now shaping the very survival of her empire. The Draxari counterattacked, desperate to regain control. Their ships swarmed the outer colonies, but Elias had anticipated this. He directed a group of Zitharan pilots to lure the attackers into a trap of energy nets and asteroid debris. The Draxari ships, caught off guard, were immobilized, leaving them vulnerable to precise strikes from human-led teams. In the midst of the battle, Elias himself piloted a small vessel to guide the strike teams in real time. His human intuition, combined with the advanced technology of Zitharan ships, allowed him to navigate hazards and anticipate enemy maneuvers. Soldiers and pilots followed his instructions flawlessly, their confidence growing with every successful strike. Velira, observing from the palace, felt a surge of pride and awe. The man she had believed modest, quiet, and unassuming was demonstrating brilliance, courage, and leadership on a scale that surpassed even her wildest expectations. His calm demeanor, careful planning, and adaptability had turned the tide of battle. As the day wore on, the Draxari realized they were losing. Their flagship was disabled, several ships were captured, and their forces were disorganized. Elias, anticipating their retreat, ordered Zitharan forces to block potential escape routes, ensuring that the enemy could not regroup. The final strike was precise and effective. Using a combination of human ingenuity and Zitharan firepower, the remaining Draxari ships were forced to surrender or retreat. The colonies were safe, and Zitharan forces had successfully defended their empire. The aftermath of the battle was remarkable. Casualties were minimal, civilians were unharmed, and the Draxari had been decisively defeated. Soldiers and citizens alike celebrated the unexpected victory, but it was Ilias who drew the most admiration. The human who had once seemed modest had revealed himself as a strategic genius, a fearless leader, and a protector of life. Velira approached him after the battle, the crystal light of Zithra's moons reflecting in her eyes. "Ilias," she said softly, "I cannot express what you have done today. You have not only saved the Empire but shown the true strength of humanity. Your modesty was a mask for courage, intelligence, and leadership beyond imagination." Ilias shook his head, calm as ever. "I only acted with what I knew and with the help of those willing to follow and trust. Strength is not always in power or size. It is in observation, adaptation, and action. That is what humans do. That is what we did today." Velira smiled, understanding fully for the first time the depth of his wisdom. "You have shown everyone that humans are not to be underestimated, and you have shown me that the man I married is far greater than I ever imagined." Ilias looked at her with quiet humility. "Perhaps it was always within me. Perhaps it was within all humans. The difference is knowing when to act and having others beside you who believe in what you can do." The victory was celebrated across Zithara. Soldiers shared stories of the human strategist who had led them to triumph, and citizens spoke of the man whose calm courage had protected their homes. Even distant colonies took note, inspired by the unexpected brilliance of a species often underestimated. In the palace gardens that night, Velira and Ilias walked together under the glow of twin moons. The crystal trees reflected the light, creating a landscape of calm and beauty after the chaos of battle. "You changed everything," Velira said softly. "Not just the battle, but the way we think about humans, strength, and leadership. You have shown that modesty can hide greatness and that courage comes in many forms." Ilias smiled gently. "Perhaps that is the lesson. Strength is not always loud, not always obvious. Sometimes it is quiet, patient, and creative, and sometimes it is shared, not alone. That is what makes it powerful." Velira looked at him, her heart full of pride, admiration, and love. She realized that she had not just married a modest man, she had married a hero, a protector, a mind capable of reshaping the destiny of worlds. In the days that followed, Zithara rebuilt, strengthened its defenses, and celebrated its victory. But the true lesson remained. Humans, often underestimated, possessed a unique combination of adaptability, courage, and ingenuity that could turn the tide of battle and inspire even the most advanced civilizations. And at the center of it all was Ilias Thorn, the quiet man whose actions had proven that modesty can hide extraordinary power, that calm determination can conquer fear, and that humanity's spirit was a force capable of uniting worlds. The Draxari would remember this day. They had underestimated a human and learned a lesson they would not forget. Zithara was defended not only by ships and armies, but by a mind, a heart, and a spirit that refused to be ignored. Queen Velira stood beside her husband, looking at the stars beyond the palace walls. She felt hope, pride, and certainty. The empire was safe, not only because of its technology or its armies, but because of the human who had quietly guided it to victory. Together, they had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, wiser, and united. And somewhere in the vastness of space, other civilizations would come to see the truth of humanity. That the modest, unassuming human could rise to extraordinary heights, protect the innocent, and shape the destiny of worlds. For Velira, for Zithara, and for the future, Ilias Thorn had proven that humans were not just visitors to the stars. They were a force to be respected, a symbol of courage, and a reminder that greatness often comes quietly, in ways no one expects. The stars shone brightly above, and the empire of Zithara had never been safer, stronger, or more inspired. The modest man had revealed his true power, and the galaxy had taken notice. The story of the human who defied expectations and protected a world had begun, and it would be remembered for generations.